Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today I wanted to talk about the casters in Final Fantasy XIV. Now, of course, we're going to be talking about some balance changes that came in patch 5.2, because there was some pretty decent balance changes happening to the caster role as a whole, but I'm also going to be talking about how to, or what I think about casting in raid progression as well, because this raid tier I switched back from playing tank to caster, because I wanted to stick with my static and they needed the caster, so I was like, sure, I'll do it. And I've also now played both Red Mage and Summoner, and in the future I do want to play some Black Mage as well once I get some more spell speed gear, because I'm not a good Black Mage player, so I need some extra spell speed to give more leniency in me basically playing bad, so to speak. Of course, I'm not an amazing Summoner. If you've watched basically last week's videos of my POV re-clears on Summoner, you'll see that I am not great at Summoner yet at all, but I do plan on practicing it a bit over the next few weeks to get better at it. And I might also bring out some optimization POVs and stuff like that in the coming week, because my static is planning on doing some optimization on the old fights. But that's beside the point. Let's talk about the casters. So first of all, let's basically do a quick overview of what changed in patch 5.2. Then I'll talk about how that actually affected the jobs in like the rankings and that kind of stuff, when it comes down to comparing them against each other DPS wise. And then I'll talk a bit about playing caster for Savage Prog and that kind of stuff. So first of all, what has changed in patch 5.2? For Black Mage, essentially nothing changed. They changed the potency of Foul to be a fixed 25% from the second enemy onwards. This only affects it in AoE scenarios. So when, for example, you're looking at doing 2 target fights, like Alexander Ultimate is, kind of, Foul is not as good as it was before, I believe, when it comes down to cleaving multiple targets. I believe it is a damage gain when it is like on a lot of targets, but on just 2 targets it's a damage drop off now to what it was before. But in this Savage tier specifically, it doesn't affect Black Mage at all, because there's only one fight where you are 2 targeting. I guess E7 also has multiple adds, but you can't bring the adds close together anyways, because then they get tethers and they get damage down, that kind of stuff. So basically in this tier there's only one fight where there's 2 targets, which is Garuda and Ifrit, but outside of the first GCD that you do on them, you don't even like get to do any AoE at all, and I'm pretty sure that Foul is not big enough to cleave both of them anyways. I'm not 100% sure of this, it could be just wide enough, but then it would still only be one usage where it doesn't really affect it that much. So Black Mage pretty much unchanged in this patch when it comes down to the Savage tier that we have this time around. Looking at Summoner, both of their dots, Bio and Miasma, got a potency reduction of 5 on their normal application potency, as well as on the damage over time potency. So technically it's a little bit more than just 5 potency if you look at the overall damage that the dot does, because it is 5 potency of that damage over time. So it's about, what is it? So we have 30 seconds for the dot, means 10 applications, like 10 server ticks, so it's about a reduction of 50 potency if you look at the total value of the dot, which is a decent amount. But on the other hand, if you look at it, it's only going to be applied once per half a minute, so it's not that big of a loss. If you look, for example, at something like Red Mage, they got buffs that are much more significant than the nerfs that Summoner got. Now with this nerf, Summoner is of course dropping a little bit in personal DPS output, but definitely not as much as people might think it is, because it is still very much a contender for the top spot with Black Mage. Looking at Red Mage, Flesh and Contra 6 got a 20 potency increase. These are the 2 off GCDs that you're mainly using for damage, and then the enhanced Jolt perk is also going to be increasing your Ver Thunder and Ver Arrow potency by 20 as well. Thunder and Arrow are of course the 2 most used GCDs when it comes down to Red Mage, or at least you're going to be using them very frequently. So getting 20 potency on those 2 skills is a very nice damage increase. Now, how does this affect these 3 jobs in ranking up against each other in a normal fight scenario? So the way how it currently is standing, we have Black Mage, which is still on the top. Black Mage was still on the top in patch 5.1 as well, where Summoner was stronger, but it was only by a very small margin, and in certain fights Summoner could even beat Black Mage, more specifically Alexander Ultimate. when we take a look at it now, Black Mage is still the reigning champion when it comes down to dealing damage, and Summoner is a very close second. And I think it should be that way because Summoner does still provide raid DPS as well through Devotion, and it also has that safety net of having a Resurrection available as well. And in my opinion, still Black Mage is a harder job to play than Summoner as well when it comes down to like positioning and that kind of stuff, but that might also be because I'm just a bad Black Mage player, and Summoner has a lot of mobility now, which I'll be doing a video on Summoner in the near future as well, by the way. I said this last week that I was going to do some kind of a thoughts on the current Summoner, and that will be coming in a later video because me and my Static are going to be going for some optimization runs today and over the course of next week as well, so I'm going to be getting more practice on Summoner, and then I can basically form a better opinion of what I think of the job back then as well. So Summoner thoughts and overview will come later down the line as well. But basically, Black Mage on the top, Summoner very close second, and then at the bottom we have Red Mage. Red Mage did get very nice potency buffs, as I said just before, but these potency buffs are still not enough to basically get Red Mage up to the level that Summoner and Black Mage are at the moment. Now, I do not think that this is a bad thing, and this is where I want to transition into playing caster for raid progression. So when it came down to this Savage tier, I was going to play Summoner unless the Red Mage buffs were good enough, and in my opinion the Red Mage buffs were good enough. So I ended up playing Red Mage for prog, and by the time that we reached Shiva, we did have some issues with the Enrage. We had like one clean pull and we still had a 1% Enrage. I was like, okay, maybe it's time for me to switch to Summoner now, because Summoner does do more damage. But in the end, by that time we also had access to ACT, and we saw that basically me playing Red Mage was not the issue, it was somebody else that had to step up their game. So Red Mage is totally fine when it comes down to dealing damage in a week 1 proc scenario, which is basically where DPS is going to be the tightest it's ever going to be. So even if Red Mage is already good enough for week 1 proc, it's definitely going to be good enough for the next ultimate encounter or for any other proc setting at all. And on top of that, that Red Mage has this very cool utility of being able to chain rest people, and I think it is basically the best caster for proc. Of course, it depends what you want in your team as well. Say for example, if you're doing a triple ranged setup, which is something that a lot more teams are experimenting with right now because of how E8 Savage or Shiva is very unfriendly towards melee DPS players, or just melees in general, because tanks kind of suffer from this as well. A lot more people are playing around with triple ranged setups, and currently in this patch the ranged physical DPS are still not buffed. They didn't get any changes at all, meaning that ranged are still basically at the bottom of the chart when it comes down to dealing damage, even something like a machinist, unfortunately enough. But that's basically because they don't contribute raid DPS, so even though their personal DPS is really good, their raid DPS is going to suffer a bit because they only take from the party, they don't give back. So ranged still a little bit at the bottom of the chart, meaning that if you are going to go for a triple ranged setup, you're going to be taking 2 casters. And that's where Red Mage kind of falls off, because Embolden, even though it is a pretty strong raid buff, it only affects physical DPS. So Red Mage basically doesn't function in a setup where you have 2 casters, because one of the, like basically your second caster is not going to be benefiting from your Embolden. So if you want to take a Red Mage in a more optimized scenario, I guess we could call it, then you could only really take it if you have 3 physical DPS dealers, which would be either 2 melees or 2 ranged physicals. So you never take it in a double caster scenario. So if you look at it like that, Red Mage kind of loses its value when you want to take double caster. So that's where Black Mage Summoner come in, and then of course, because the fact that Black Mage and Summoner are also the top DPS when it comes down to the casters, it kind of makes Red Mage lose value. Now, on the other hand, if you do want to be in a more standard composition where you have those 2 melees, 1 ranged, 1 caster, or at least that used to be the old standard, the new standard doesn't matter anymore. You just need 1 melee, 1 ranged, 1 caster. The 4th one can be whatever you want, even though double physical ranged, as I said, is not good because the ranged are bottom tier at the moment. But still, basically, double melee is still the standard as to what most of the people raiding are basically doing. So Red Mage is still pretty good for that. So Embolden being strong, them having this basically res always available. If you want a res on Summoner, you basically need to keep Swift cost for it. and Swiftcast is something that I at least like to use quite frequently in my rotation, especially for Bahamut, for example. So you don't necessarily always keep your Swiftcast ready to res, meaning that Red Mage is going to be able to res people a lot better, and when it comes down to progression, that is very important because you need all those people up for those mechanics, to see the mechanics, to learn the mechanics, and even when it comes down to going for a clear, a Red Mage just being able to res someone instantly rather than having to wait for one of your healers to find the time in between all the healing and stuff that they're doing to res them is very valuable. And for example, when we did our E5 first clear on week 1, I think both of our healers died at the same time, so if I wouldn't have been on Red Mage, then we probably wouldn't have cleared that pull, and me being on Red Mage made it so that we cleared it. That together with the increased DPS that they now bring when it comes down to their personal DPS makes it so that it is a very solid choice for a week 1 job. And even outside of week 1, when you're just doing Savage Prog, later down the line when you even have more gear, it's going to be even better. Of course it is still behind Summoner and Black Mage, but it does give you that chain resing option in your team as well, which I think is incredibly valuable when it comes down to prog. I think, and I thought about this as well when we were hitting E8 and Rage, where if you need that little bit of extra damage when you're fighting against the Enrage, sure, you can switch to a different job, if you are of course good enough on it. The reason why I did not change to Summoner for E8 at the end, once we're done progging the fight, was because I am not a very good Summoner at the moment. I'm still learning it. If you've watched last week's clears on Summoner, then you'll know that I'm not a great Summoner at the moment. So that's why I decided to stay on Red Mage, because I was very comfortable on Red Mage, I was very familiar with it. I am pretty decent at it as well, I'd like to believe. So that's why I decided to stay Red Mage, because I'd rather play a good Red Mage than a Black Summoner, or a bad Summoner. I was thinking of Black Mage, that's why I said Black there. But basically, any of the three is viable for prog right now. Even after prog, of course, as well. Black Mage is still on the top, Summoner a close second, and then Red Mage way behind that. When I say way behind, I'm not just talking like 100-200 DPS, like that may be the difference in between Black Mage and Summoner, but I think it's a good 400-500 DPS on average that Red Mage is behind the other two right now, which is quite significant if you're considering how close Black Mage and Summoner are together. But on the other hand, Red Mage does bring that insane utility of just being able to save pulls, chain res people and that kind of stuff, which the other two definitely do not bring. So it's more of a DPS versus safety net that you're kind of thinking about right there. And then when it comes to fighting and Enrage, sure, if you have the same kind of practice on the other two casters as well, you could change just for the sake of meeting the DPS check or something like that. But even then, a well-played Red Mage is going to do more damage than a badly played Summoner or something like that if you're not as practiced on the other jobs. So TLDR, Black Mage still as strong as it's always been. Summoner, small nerfs here, basically only on their dots, which doesn't affect their overall DPS by all that much. I think it's a 1% DPS difference or something like that compared to in 5.1. Red Mage, pretty decent DPS buffs when it comes down to their personal DPS. Still not enough to bring them up to the level of a Black Mage and a Summoner, but on the other hand, I also don't think they should be, because they do have that insane utility in the chain res possibility that they do have. When it comes down to prog, I think Red Mage is the best caster by far because of this like the chain res utility. When it comes down to fighting for an Enrage, I think Summoner is going to be basically the best choice because it is so flexible. It does a lot of damage, almost on par with Black Mage, but it still has that safety net of a possible res if you do want to keep your Swift cast for it. So those are kind of my opinions on how the casters are at the moment. Also how they kind of rank up against each other when it comes down to dealing damage. If you have some other opinions on what you think about playing caster for prog and that kind of stuff, feel free to leave them in the comments as well. But that's going to be it for me. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.